Hello, good evening, and welcome to 10 Minutes with TmFal. This evening, we're going to be talking about menopause. Yeah, you heard that right. Menopause. It's not fun. It's not something we like to talk about, but we're going to talk about it with a slight spin and really looking at menopause and the 7 habits. So if you've read my book, The Decade After, Thriving After Divorce, you know that I like the Steve Covey book, The 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. Now, that has nothing to do with menopause at all, but it's a book that I like. I like those 7 habits, and I have talked about using them in reference to the divorce process. We've talked about the 7 habits and empty nesting on an earlier podcast. And this time, I'm just going to do a slight spin and talk about the 7 habits and menopause. So, what are those 7 habits? Just as a little background, and then we'll talk about how they're applicable or how we can kind of process menopause using those 7 habits. So, the 7 habits of highly successful people was written and published by Stephen Covey years and years ago, and I've read that book a couple of times. And these are these 7 habits. 1, be proactive. 2, second habit, begin with the end in mind. Third habit is put first things first. 4, or habit 4, is think win-win. Habit 5 is seek first to understand, then be understood. Habit 6 is synergize. And 7 is renewal. And so these 7 habits are in the Covey book and very well highlighted, applicable to business and to relationships, but I think they're applicable to practically everything. So those are the 7 habits, and he puts them into categories. The first 3 are private victories. These are things you're working on your own, in partnerships, in work relationships, in careers, in success. Being proactive, begin with end in mind, put first things first. Those are private victories. Then it talks about the next 3, which are public victories, where everybody sees that you're working with the next person. Think win-win, seek first to understand, and synergize. All of these things require partnerships with other people. And then the 7 is renewal. That's sweet spot when all the other things have happened. So how do these 7 habits relate to menopause? Well, we'll start with the first one, be proactive. What that means is that menopause does not just happen suddenly. In some cases, it might, if you're having what we call a surgical menopause, where for reasons, usually because of cancer or other conditions, there is menopause that happens suddenly because of surgical removal of the ovaries. But for the most part, menopause is a process. There's a process of a perimenopause, which can start which usually is years and years before menopause happens, where things start to change. There's a lot of things that are happening. That's a period of perimenopause. We also know that the average age of menopause is early 50s, and that's a range, that's average. Some people go into menopause in their 40s, and some people they go till much later in their 50s or early 60s. But what we do know is that all women will eventually go into menopause. So being proactive is knowing that this will happen and starting to do your research about the process. The other thing you can do about being proactive, is finding out if you have access to your mother and you're fortunate for her to still be alive, to ask how old she was when she went through menopause. There is a genetic predisposition to having menopause about the same time. So if your mother went early in her 40s, you statistically are more likely to. And if she went later, you may. So asking about your mother or older sister or first degree relative sometimes helps, allows you to be proactive, to know when things are happening and if symptoms you're having could be perimenopause. And then doing research about what are the symptoms and what are the best ways to manage those symptoms. Second, begin with end in mind. I think this is pretty obvious. And the end is that menopause will happen, and then you'll be in a place of postmenopause. So the perimenopause and menopausal time can be traumatic in terms of symptoms and signs, and sometimes people don't expect it or they haven't talked about it. But if you think with the end in mind, that once the process starts, at some point it will end. The hot flashes will end, the symptoms, the CNS symptoms, the physical symptoms, the irritability, all of those symptoms, which not everybody has the same ones, will end. So beginning with the end in mind is important, because that allows you to know that this is not a permanent process and the symptoms will resolve or come to a new baseline. Number 3 is putting first things first. And the first things at that point is you going through that process. So realizing that some of the symptoms may be distracting, sometimes they almost seem disabling. But first things first is, are you healthy? Is this a normal process? Are there other things that are going on that you're confusing with symptoms of menopause? Also, is that the time to put yourself first and think about other things you can do to manage your symptoms? Thinking about things to manage your physical symptoms, your mental health symptoms, all the other things you may need to put in place to make it a more comfortable transition. Thinking about getting screened at that point for other conditions, and putting yourself, using that as a time to make sure you're up to date on your health screenings, breast cancer screenings. It's really important, especially if you're going to be going on hormonal therapy. So putting first things first and saying, this is something that happens to every woman at some point, and what can I do to get help for my symptoms? So really putting yourself first and getting the help that you need during that time. The fourth habit is think win-win. So this is when you think, well, this is happening, but what are the benefits of that? That eventually with menopause comes no periods, so no rushing around for tampons or pads, comes no possibility of pregnancy. With that comes a state of you're done with that part, and you can be done and move on. So thinking win-win, like it's inevitable, different ages for different women, but it will happen. But once it's done, you're done. So think win-win. Number 5 is seek first to understand, then be understood. This is important because if people have never gone through menopause and they're younger or they're of the opposite sex, they may not get your symptoms. And all they see is the effects of your symptoms. They see you get up suddenly because you're having a hot flash. They see you get irritable. They see you a little cranky. They see you sometimes forgetting things. They see you sweating in odd places and then getting embarrassed for that and being defensive and irritable. All of these things I know about. And so when you seek first to understand that this is what they see the irritability, then you can be understood, because you understand where they're coming from and why sometimes if your children seem like they're making fun of your hot flashes, or co-workers are making funny jokes about how irritable you are, seek to understand that what they see is the outward manifestation, and not understanding that you were up half the night, unable to sleep from night sweats and drenching sweats and insomnia. Once you understand that, you're able to know where they're coming from. And if you put first things first and figured out ways to help yourself with some of your symptoms, then you're less defensive to people around you. Number 6 is Synergize. This is where you find people with shared experiences and synergize. So you figure out how to help, what symptom management things are out there. You talk to other women going through the process. If you have friends, just like we talk about a lot of things, we can talk about menopause and share tips of what's helped, have fun about it. My friends and I joke about some of the symptoms. You can synergize and figure out how to help each other through the process. Think about the benefits when you're finally done with menopause. Talk about what helps with the symptoms. Who's a good clinician who's helped? What are some of the non-medical therapies that have helped? What are some of the things that helps with the insomnia or night sweats? I really synergize by looking to other people going through shared experiences, some who are starting and some who are past that process, and really growing with that group. And 7 is renewal. This is that place when the whole process is done, the ups and downs, the emotional, hormonal changes have happened. And you're in this place, older, wiser, more mature woman with no periods. And this is a time of renewal and synergy, and really looking at that as that next phase of life and your growth as a woman with new goals, new challenges ahead, but also a time of renewal and great growth. So if you think about it, menopause happens, different ages for all of us. Different symptoms. Some people go relatively unscathed with minimal symptoms, and some have a lot of symptoms. But the main thing is to think about it as a rite of passage, just like puberty. And looking at those 7 habits allows you to kind of put a little twist on it. So be proactive about it. It's going to happen. Do your research ahead of time. 2, begin with the end in mind. It will end. 3 is put first things first. At this time, it's you, and using that time to get help and to get up to date on all your other screenings, age-appropriate screenings. 4 is to think win-win and think of all the benefits of not having periods anymore. 5, seek first to understand and then be understood. Understand that what people see is the outward manifestation of your sleepless nights and night sweats and irritability, and then you'll understand where they're coming from. 6 is synergize with other people with shared experiences, help and support each other. And 7 is a state of renewal, older, wiser, more mature woman who's also conquered menopause. So this has been 10 minutes with TmFal, actually 12 minutes with TmFal. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you for listening.